Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to see some of our students joining us. I think our faculty is also there as we now start today with the second in the series of our open series. So we've had one before, then we launched the technical series last Thursday, and I'm very happy to welcome Rajkumar Suresh today, who's joining us. Very happy to see you. Welcome to the D6 Architecture program in Heriot-Watt University, Dubai. I think it's been very successful having these online open series sessions because I think it gives us a better opportunity to invite more speakers right across the world. So welcome, and a very warm welcome to all the students and all the faculty who've joined us. And I hope you've all had a good break because soon we're going to be starting with the week and loads of work till the end of the semester. Welcome, Suresh. On to you, Alida. Thank you.
Hello. I hope you can hear me okay. So I'll just read Raj's bio and embarrass him a little bit before he presents. Raj is a trained architect and urban designer. His work draws inspiration from technology, sociology, economics, and film. He works with AECOM right now. He's based in Dubai. A global design consultancy as part of the master planning and landscape team here in Dubai. He has led projects in the South America, North Africa, working with multidisciplinary teams to deliver large-scale master plans. Raj enjoys being creative, especially when it comes to scenario building, which gives the opportunity to educate, provoke, and shock. In the past, he has produced commentaries on super sustainability and the future of public realm. Some of his radical ideas even flirt with the polemical. So I used to work with Raj in London, in Atkins, where we were both based. We worked in different departments, but we often had quite interesting debates about design and how we approach things, and that's really why I've invited him here today. And so we were both working on a very large project in Oman, which was the Dukam project, which he, I will always say, forever stole from me. So, and a worthy stealing, though, having said that. So welcome, Raj. Please share your screen if you can. And then what we'll do after, we can have, Raj has asked if we can have some Q&A in between. So if you have any questions in between, just let me know and we can moderate that. Otherwise, we can have questions at the end as well. Great, thank you.
So let me just start sharing my screen. Am I doing this right? Am I sharing?
Yeah, it's just coming now. Just give it a second.
Well, it come through. First of all, thank you, Alida, for having me and that really kind introduction, and Shamil and Harpreet for setting this talk up. So what I have for all of you today are a few projects. They are my favorite projects, and oddly enough, most of them do not have any buildings in them, but they talk about big ideas and gestures, and these gestures have come out of an intense architectural way of thinking. And in between sections, I was requesting that there could be questions so that it's not just me talking one way. So we could stop and take questions, but then again, we could have questions at the end. So please raise your hand and the moderator can facilitate. Is my screen up now? Is it all blank?
Yeah, Raj, it's I think the first blank slide.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the 11th hour, at least for me, comes to be a standard way of working. It's when the greatest ideas flow. It's the 1 hour before the submission. It's last minute inspiration. It's the doodle on a napkin at McDonald's, and it's what you scribble on the corner of your notes. There's always a risk of a fantastic failure, but the attitude is you have to go big, right? Like there's no other way. And but this wasn't how it was always for me, because I went to architectural school in a government-run engineering college, And there it was all about the rules. You could gauge a design school by what you're asked at design juries. And for me, what I always got was what's the depth of the beam? What's the column size? Will this building stand? What are the parking numbers? What are the turning radiuses? And so on. Design in my college seemed to have a right and a wrong answer. But silly as it seems, I couldn't have been more thankful for such a rigid and rule-based foundation, because to do something that people haven't seen, you have to be able to find a rule worth breaking. And the more established the rule is, the better the design outcome when you do break it. And that's how I create most of my fictions. The strength of any fiction is in how plausible and real it seems, because the more likely it seems, the more people are willing to believe it. I hate horror movies, but you have to have a special regard for the Japanese brand of psychological horror, because the fear of accidentally finding a cursed videotape instills more dread than a big hairy thing with horns and bloody teeth. The more likely it seems, the more people are willing to believe it. So I went to the Bartlett to pursue my master's, and initially there was tremendous pressure, self-imposed pressure, to do something cool for my first project and to sort of announce myself. And the odd thing is I couldn't come up with anything. So I basically resigned to the idea of doing something with sustainability and how it's a good thing and how it's something that we should all aspire to. The question then became, is there a point at which it can stop being a good thing? And if I can find that point. So is there a way to push this idea of sustainability? Back in 2008, 2009, growing vegetables on your roof and balconies had become some sort of a rage, and people were treating it like it was a fad. So I landed on urban agriculture to see what the impact of London producing its own food will be. But then again, vegetables wasn't pushing it enough. London's meat consumption was almost double the world's average, with chicken as the majority group. Now, meat's carbon footprint is nearly 10 times that of vegetables. So if I wanted London to be truly sustainable, vegetables wasn't going to do it. It had to be meat. Now, I think I have a sort of dysfunctional love-hate relationship with chicken. I love eating chicken, and I hate them enough to want them to be grilled on my plate all the time. So I studied chicken, I watched and learned the process, I understood the process. So what I learned during that period really put me off chicken for a year. So here's the project that I called Quicken Chicken. Quicken Chicken, how London became self-sufficient in its chicken demands. Quicken Chicken exposed me to a lot of very scary statistics. They're all very Googleable. But suffice to say that most store-bought meat is very unhealthy. There are obviously a few types of meat based on how they are farmed and how they are processed. And it seems an inconvenient truth that 70% of the chicken consumed comes from intensely farmed methods. And in London especially, over the last 100 years, meat processing was systematically moved outside the city. And this was to meet demands in space requirements, hygiene, public safety. So having to move it back would mean having to urbanize some of its processes. So what I did is I designed a compact, linear, semi-automated meat processing system that would produce a whole packed chicken in 13 easy steps. By designing the most gruesome component of this process to be completely open and visible, it ensures transparency in a process that is mostly hidden and associated with controversy and misinformation. A useful consequence of exposing these processes, which are typically hidden, might be that people are eventually discouraged from eating meat, thereby reducing their carbon footprint. But I must be honest, that wasn't the intention of the project. Some quick mathematics yielded that to accommodate London's daily requirement of chicken, just the chicken, the space required would be immense, roughly 3 million square meters, and that's just for the chicken farm. So to put it in perspective, that's about 6 times as large as the Dubai Mall. To basically grow the chicken that London would consume in a day. four primary parts, starting with production, processing, consumption, and waste reuse. And I saw all of these working together as an ecosystem. Meat consumption in this case takes on a whole new meaning because it's not to discourage the chicken connoisseur, but it builds respect for the food you eat, trust in how it's processed, freedom in how it's consumed, and simultaneously exposing you to the waste that is generated. Quicken chicken, like any decent urban proposal, has some very serious implications on the city's physical, built environment, its ecology, and the lifestyle of its people. I just wanted to show this because we must never forget that the work we do as architects and designers and planners has tremendous impact on the lives of this planet. So it's important to question and challenge, and you must never hold back from going against the grain. So I will stop here for Alida, are there any questions?
Let's have a look. Anybody have any chicken-based questions? So far, nothing.
Okay, we'll save it for the end.
What looks like the next animal?
Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay. So this is The Killing Joke by Alan Moore. It's one of my all-time favorite books. It's a simple story of a villain committing despicable acts until a hero stops him. But I love The Killing Joke because it introduced me to a style of storytelling that I have always tried to employ in communicating all my design ideas. It has to be a style that stands out with content that could be shocking, a style that makes people curious. But the most important thing that The Killing Joke does well is it has a beautiful balance between what is shown and what is left to the viewer's imagination. So it assumes that the audience is also quite smart, and that's a beautiful thing to see. The biggest challenge with any mode of communication is to make people stop and pay attention. You do that by showing them something familiar, you do that by showing them something unique, and you do that by generating curiosity. So this was the intention behind this single-page competition submission for an intelligent street. The idea was that because the theme was an intelligent street, I assumed all the firms and companies would produce these, Wi-Fi enabled systems and drones and robots. And I wanted to go back to the basics. Really, I thought that if the judges would just stop and look at this competition entry, that is a win in itself. So the competition was based in Croydon, a town in the south of London. It's very rich in its history of arts and music. And over the last few years, it's been seeing a lot of real estate activity. And this competition was part of that drive by the Croydon City Council. What I would like to show you now is the presentation I did for the second stage of the competition, the presentation to the Croydon City Council. First, let's take a short trip to Croydon of the future, to streets that look entirely normal, but in reality are anything but. So with Unhindered, the proposition is simple: to create a public realm that responds to the user's needs rather than the other way around. The street of the future would be many things and should accommodate efficiently the needs of a variety of disparate users. The street of the future would be extremely efficient, capable of catering to varying pedestrian and vehicular demands. Pedestrians will have priority, where the width of the street would depend upon the number of people using it, obviously. And defined by paving lines that can vary, the street would ensure a minimum amount of space for the users, and it can just as easily widen to accommodate a wider vehicular corridor. Information on local events, user patterns, climate data, air quality, they will all be able to influence the nature of the public realm, providing the optimum environment for every need. The street of the future would also be extremely safe. The street will be less about signs, curbs, bollards, and barriers, and more about improving situational awareness. You could walk past whizzing cars feeling entirely safe, knowing that their sensors would only allow them to function within restricted RFID corridors. Occasionally, a human-driven vehicle will pass, which the street is meant to sense, and should there be any deviation, a simple change in paving profiles will force them to comply with the regulations of the street. We also think the street of the future will be extremely clean. It will be free from visual clutter. Sensor and biometric systems will enable the street to offer a customizable environment where the elements will appear only when necessary. Croydon, we felt, will also be representative of our changing attitude towards waste. Waste disposal will no longer be a casual affair, and we think it should come with individual accountability. The air will be cleaner thanks to a critical mass of planting and built surfaces that can absorb pollutants from the air, converting them to salts, which will then wash away in the rain. Regular monitoring aside, the street may even be capable of diverting vehicular traffic should it realize that pollution levels have exceeded safe limits. So, I also think the street of the future will be extremely lively. For the first time, the environment will be as much a participant as the participants and spectators themselves. The street would offer real-time feedback on an event and how the event is progressing. Pressure-sensitive paving will be able to identify movement and relative positions of people, and this will help in wayfinding. The street of the future will also be extremely comfortable. The weather in London is, to be honest, is less than ideal. So overcrowded sunny spots on a summer day and the hunt for shade when it rains will be a thing of the past. Shading devices will not only respond to the needs of the users, but will also be influenced by weather forecasts and the street's own sensor system. And they will all respond in ways that put user comfort at the forefront. And if you do forget to carry your umbrella and it rains quite suddenly, you wouldn't have to worry. The street is expected to have you covered because we found that static energy repels water molecules. So you might even have old age technology with new age application. The street of the future will be all of these things because with technology, empathy is key. And for the first time, the street will be able to detect what people want and respond to it. It just goes to show that if you use technology well, if you use it right, it can make our streets more safe, more fun, more environmentally sound, more beautiful, and eventually more successful. The visions we just saw now are entirely feasible with the technologies we have today, and they're only going to become more common and economical in the future. All we need to do is carefully consider the vision that we have for the future and start taking the steps towards it. We think the problem with design is that we take decisions on behalf of the end users, and we might be wrong. We will soon see a big shift because environments will start becoming products of data capture and adaptive technologies. And the call in this competition was to ask Croydon to dream big, because if they act now and decide well, we felt the streets could be magic. Alida, any questions?
I have a question. You didn't win, did you?
No, but I think that was the intention, because the winning entry was something that could be built. So Croydon wanted something that they could invest money in and build, whereas what we were aspiring to with I Street is a whole system. You can't just do one thing to make an environment intelligent. It has to be everything speaking to everything else. So the feedback that we got was really good, and it almost was better than winning, because they said it was too far ahead for them to want to implement it now. So yeah, it was a win in my head. We didn't win.
But actually, by not winning, you kind of showed that what you're thinking is beyond what is asked for today. It's a visionary piece of work, and I think that's a real compliment, actually, what they said about the work. And also, I just want to add, Raj, if anyone was not clear, that you did all of that yourself. Those are your sketches and your videos that you've created, right?
Yeah. I think communication is a lost art. We resign ourselves to really simplistic modes of communication, and sometimes a good idea gets lost because we're not able to communicate it well. And Alida, just to add to that, because what Google and Microsoft are trying to do now is called ambient computing, which means you don't know where your device stops and where your environment begins. Everything is a computer, everything is intelligent. So the I Street now, the things that we were talking about maybe 3 years back, are things that are going to be very real in the next 20 years, because that's what companies like Google and Microsoft are planning for.
Yeah, the immaterial technology, right? So it becomes part of your sensing system.
Yeah.
So we don't have questions, so we can keep moving forward, but I'm sure people are thinking a lot, and probably it takes time to articulate those thoughts. So let's just keep
I had a feeling everybody would come expecting to see buildings, and this is all ideas.
So do we get chicken and monkeys? That's great. And Ferraris. That's good. Okay. Keep going.
Okay, and now on to something that things that I do in the office. Most clients know what they want, but sometimes what they truly want cannot be expressed in a design brief. So when encountering these inevitable roadblocks, we get to be at our creative best. So some of our most satisfying experiences have come when clients have initially expressed a strong negativity towards our work, with whom we eventually become trusted partners. So I'd like to think there's never always a great brief, but there's always great opportunities. So over 300 years ago, one settlement changed the face of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So from warring tribes in search of hospitable environments came culture, agriculture, settlement, politics, and religion. Now, this past that has come to define this region has been the inspiration for this next project, and it's called Raya Gate. It's a vision for Saudi Arabia focused on sustainability, learning, preservation of their culture, preservation of nature, and where they want to see Saudi Arabia go in the future. Sorry, this was just a mood setting. So the last vision was called Aturef. It's a world UNESCO World Heritage Site, and that is the inspiration for this master plan. So Aturef is touted as the birthplace of the Saudi Kingdom, and it is revived again at Diriyah as the world's largest cultural destination. It mirrors the Najdi architecture of the past, but sensitively adopted for the 21st century. So what I'm showing you now was a competition entry from the very early stages of the project. The design is for a 7 square kilometer site to the northwest of Riyadh. So when I say it's the largest cultural destination, 7 square kilometers is about downtown Dubai plus Business Bay included. So that's how big the site is. It includes the World Heritage Site, Atturef, and it's considered the birthplace of the kingdom. Now, the site also straddles a very significant ecological character, which is the Wadi Hanifa, which is full of fields and palms. But the site is also cut through the middle by a highway. It's quite clear that the master plan has two distinct characteristics. The west is more inspired by heritage, it's closer to Atturef, and on the east, it gradually transitions from a very traditional to a more contemporary layout and structure. The key defining feature is the central spine. Now it's angling and turning. It's a journey of 100 stories. And at every junction, the visitor is rewarded with what they call an asset, which could be a museum, it could be an experience, or a traditional activity. Now, this central spine also opens up at regular intervals to the wadi, and this happens as squares, plazas, and markets. Now, the concept for something like this was quite interesting because Atturef was a political base. Now, the other side of the wadi was the religious base, and they both would come down to the wadi for trade, for exchange of ideas, and religious teachings. So that was a concept that sort of permeated throughout the master plan. Now, it's quite important to understand the vernacular that we're trying to achieve because it's a double-edged sword. Because if you think about it, over 7 square kilometers, climatically, if you're inspired by local architecture, the buildings would have to be extremely close, extremely dense, and if the site is that large, it means the typology will drive even greater development. So 7 square kilometers of much more development than you'd need. The site is also over 3 kilometers long. So mimicking a lifestyle from 100 years back would mean a structure that was designed more for pedestrian comfort than vehicular movement. And you can imagine what that means in a place like Saudi Arabia, walking 3 kilometers. The third challenge is in accommodating a more modern convenience and features within an environment that was meant to take you into the past. And this had to be done without seeming pastiche in a way. Now, this was a competition that we won, but it was not always a competition. Because what happened halfway through the original commission, we were kicked out, and it happened in the most glorious fashion. The powers that be said, no, we don't want this team, and nobody wanted to touch us after that. But we had a choice, either walk away or stay back, compete, and get the project back to us. Thankfully, we pushed ourselves to fight, and we got our place in it. So the next few months were some of the most painful and simultaneously enjoyable months of my career. Now, for the first time in my life, we had to approach a large-scale master plan as a series of stories, experiential stories, stories that would eventually translate into spaces and places, spaces that would then translate into neighborhoods, and neighborhoods that would weave together to form a master plan. It was an almost idealistic academic approach because we had to constantly switch between scales, and not just physical scales, but also in experience scales. We learned that the greatest and most sensitive design interventions are lost if we cannot communicate it right. We learned that we learned to read our clients' remarks better, what they said, and also what they meant by what they're saying. We learned that experiences sell. Nothing takes an audience away from design as a technical top-down plan does. Words work, immersive experiences work, stories work, sounds and sights work. You have to remember that if what you're doing doesn't excite you, it's definitely not going to excite your client and your audience. We learned that the stories that people want to hear aren't the ones that are necessarily true or accurate. The stories that sold best are the ones that are positive and sounded awesome. So you have to sell people stories that make them feel good, make them feel proud, because anything less impressive, people will usually choose to ignore. Now, after this, what I would like to leave you with is a 1-minute clip. It's my favorite thing in the whole project. I made it after we got kicked out because we wanted to let the client know that their aspirations, that their culture, that their vision was important to us. and the video was meant to excite them and get them on board with our thinking. And it was also meant to give them a tiny, tiny hint of the master plan that we were creating for them. So there's a lot of curiosity as well. And I think in the end, it won them over. So mission accomplished. As you can see, I mean, you must have realized by now that I love making videos and clips, and somehow it's really it excites most of the senses. You know, you can see and you can hear, and if only there was some way I can make it smell as well. Alita, we're okay on time. Can I go for one more?
Yeah, please go ahead. We've got some questions, but we can just shift them to the end if you want to keep going. That's fine.
No. Do you want me to go ahead, or do you want me to get the questions?
You choose, Raj. You choose.
Let's hear a question.
Okay. So one question says, this is talking about the Croydon project. You said that we decide on behalf of the end user and we might be wrong. How do you think we can include end users better in our design? And do you think the street of the future is friendly for elders and for different user groups?
I mean, that's a brilliant question. It's exactly what the council asked us, not in those exact same words, but it was the same vein. One thing, yes, we do try to understand. You can see that design is subjective, right? So a lot of the times designers impose their will on a site because we have this, we assume that we know better, that we understand it better, and we made such mistakes with that heritage project because we thought we knew what the client wanted, and it was wrong. So I think listening is very important. A lot of the times the information is out there and you can see it. A lot of design firms conduct surveys to understand what the people want. Sometimes it's not the most beautiful thing, it's not the most logical thing, but hey, that's what they want. Now you usually feel split with something like that because do you give them what you think is right or do you give them what they want? So, which is where I think going into the future with ambient computing and things, if our environments, especially the public realm, is a blank slate, it can be anything it wants. So in that sense, it has to be safe for a small child. It should also be efficient to hold a car rally. And the day after that, it should be able to transform into a farmer's market. Now, especially talking about all levels of users and all age groups, I think a street that is driven by something smarter than just a single intention would work better. So in the video, if you've noticed, there was this woman who forgets her smart bracelet or who forgets to take her medication. So the street is expected to know that her requirements for seating spaces are very different to a young 22-year-old boy. Now, how do you design a street for that? Do you design for do you say every 5 minutes there's going to be a seat, or do you assume that an old person would want a seat every 30 seconds? Now, the intention with the iStreet was that the street should know. The street would know that you're old. The street would know that you've forgotten to take your medication, and the street would know that your requirements are different. So, yeah, technologies exist today. Pressure sensitive paving, you're able to do biometrics. You can read faces. People wear devices on their hand. It tells you what their heartbeat is, whether it's elevated. The street is capable of knowing more than it does today. So does that answer the question?
I think thoroughly it does. Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting. Let's keep going, and I'll save some of the questions until the end so we can see more of your work.
I just have one more. This one's called Going Against the Grain. My time at the Bartlett UCL was it was a period of great freedom, and I got to experiment a lot. And in contrast, my experience in India was one of convention, rules, and processes. So when we are so overrun by opinions and ideas, the ones that shock and awe are best remembered. They may not be the right thing, but they are best remembered. This comes from knowing exactly which rules to break and which rules to push to the limit. So I think in most of my work, I like to go to find that point beyond which it just comes crashing down and then take 2 steps behind. And I think that's part of my whole process. Now, the World Architecture News Urban Challenge, so this is another competition. It was an open competition, and it was about the future of our cities. And the brief was about how autonomous technologies are going to solve a lot of our urban problems. And I didn't know about the competition. I was at site, and I got an update on LinkedIn the day before the deadline saying, "Oh, tomorrow there's a deadline for this." And I spent the night drawing what I thought was an appropriate response to the brief. The problem is that we expect these technologies to magically solve a lot of the current urban problems that we have created ourselves. And they do seem to be on a trajectory to deliver cleaner, safer, and more pedestrian-friendly environments. But it sounds too good to put all our hopes on just autonomous technologies. So I wanted to ask if they can be too much of a good thing. So what I did was envision future dystopian scenarios so that we can identify a potential tipping point so that when we get there in the future, we'll be able to recognize it. Because I think we as humans have a problem with excess. We always go overboard, and then we are stuck fielding all sorts of problems. Now, there are a series of little cartoons, and each cartoon tackles one assumption that the brief makes about a potential pessimistic future. It's almost a sort of what if assumption. So the first one is safety. So do you really think drones make your streets safer, especially for our children? Who controls these drones? Who owns these drones, and who's liable for them? The brief also assumed that the quality of life will improve. So the question was, does being in a perfectly organized life really make it any better? Would you start craving variety and change? There was a commentary on pedestrian safety. Now, how cars would understand pedestrians better. But the question is, would a machine prioritize life, threat, and loss the same way as a human does? Because one of the major dilemmas with car companies today with intelligent technologies is the question of morality. How does a car choose who to protect and who to compromise in the case of an accident? Healthy, they felt the streets would become healthier. So the argument was, does an increased comfort and convenience lead to better lifestyles, or do we as humans succumb to let's say a lifestyle of excess? And a question on the environment in general. So would you be comfortable losing your access to open skies? Because if the future is going to be taken up by drones, then the idea was to push that idea so far that, let's say, like the cars clog up your streets, what if drones clog up your skies? Are we comfortable with that idea? So when the brief asked, how great are autonomous vehicles and drones going to make our cities? I wanted to say we can't be sure, because we really should be careful that we don't go overboard. And the nicest part about this competition was I was very lucky to have really good judges. They were very open-minded because they gave it a special dystopian prize. So I went against the brief, but they still felt it was, that they had to introduce a little special category just for, just for this. What happened after the win is all the winners globally and a few representatives from tech and automobile companies in the industries, we became part of a think tank, and the output was a manifesto for urban change in London. And it was a really good experience because everybody at that table was very pro, and I got to be again a devil's advocate, a sort of voice for reason, and I really love playing that role. I think that's the end. And yeah, these are the 4 that I really wanted to share because I specifically picked them because I wanted to show, rather than an architecture, I wanted to show an architectural way of thinking. It's a way of understanding, ways of communicating, because I think our profession is a responsibility we don't take seriously enough, especially when we look at the buildings all around us. We must realize that our work goes beyond buildings, because the ideas we create, fight for, reveal, and challenge might just be the thing needed to solve all our world's messes. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really nice to see. Lovely to see how you went from your school through to your most commercial work in Saudi and then back to something that is a little bit more experimental. Really nice. Thank you, Raj. We have a few questions and I'm sure we'll get more. So I really hope those who are thinking and inspired by this work can think of what they'd like to ask. So I will ask you the very easy and quick question, which is, I think quite a few people are thinking about, is what software do you use for this work that you do? Particularly the sketches, I think they're really unique.
Well, sketches are sketches. There's tracing paper and pens. But I think I love playing with motion graphics and film. So there is After Effects and Premiere. And some of these things you can even do in PowerPoint. PowerPoint has got quite strong to do animations and things, really simple ones. You take PNGs inside and then you can make them do things. So as a starting point, yeah, PowerPoint is really easy. Flash is good, but it's a bit outdated. But After Effects is really powerful. I would think go for After Effects.
Great, thank you. So Shamil has asked, how does the street of the future address issues such as homeless citizens, street vendors, and city to town populations? Should the street have some kind of ownership for its functioning? That's interesting.
Yeah, actually, I didn't address that at all in the design because I was so focused on, I have to admit, I was so focused on the technology aspect. I didn't consider the homeless people in London. But in terms of the other users, like let's say the street wants to become a market the next day, that would be possible. The street is supposed to enable that to happen. And in terms of ownership, the idea of maintenance and running it was supposed to have been with the Croydon Council. So they were supposed to, it's supposed to be their mandate. But yes, the homeless people, I'm sorry, I can come up with something on the spot, but to be honest, I did not consider them in that competition.
Ah, so that's something to think about. More of a generic question now, a big one. Do you always believe in building for a cause?
Yeah, I do. I have the things that I have the things that keep me grounded. Like I like competitions. I like thought leadership. I like doing research work. But then again, I am working in a corporate, so a lot of the times you're part of big teams and you don't really agree upon some of the work that you're asked to do, and that's just the way it is. Because what you hope normally is that you get into a project and you handhold the client and you bring them towards a more sensitive sort of a solution, but that doesn't happen all the time. So yeah, it doesn't happen all the time, but I do my competitions and things just to keep myself a bit more grounded.
Great. There's quite a few
But
more.
I my soul to the corporate. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
you
the
did.
question.
We all do sometimes. So another question we've got quite a few, so I'll just run through them. One is saying, how did you cope at the Bartlett after your rigid education in India?
I think at the Bartlett I discovered a new sense of freedom, because the Bartlett is meant to be cool. So when you go and see the portfolio of students at the Bartlett, there's this pressure that you have to do something crazy. And maybe the next time I get an opportunity, I'll show you guys my thesis, because it was about, it really is that, because I felt the students were doing such crazy things. You could do outworldly stuff, but suddenly that stops inspiring, and that stops generating awe. Like, people are not awed by crazy flying cars and things. So it's important to find a fundamental rule. That's what I keep saying. I keep repeating that. There is a rule. If you want to do something new, you have to find the rule that everybody follows and break that rule. It's like gravity. The minute you start, it's an exercise that you could do. It's like saying, what should you do with zero gravity? So you have to break a rule. And what you know, you're doing something great if people either love it or hate it. And usually when they hate it, it means you're doing something completely new, because they've not seen it, they don't understand it. So yeah, maybe the next time I have a chance, I'll show you guys my thesis. But the understanding was that I learned all the rules in India. I knew how to make a building stand. And then now I know what to do to make a building completely appear abnormal. So I think that's what it was. It was about finding that little weak point. It's like, you know, the things that it's finding that pressure point. You find that weak link, and then you break it, and then you suddenly find something new emerge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. So actually the contrast between the two was what helped you to find that balance, right?
So, and because I was so used to having juries where they asked me, you know, how wide the span was, that suddenly when they didn't have to ask me that, I was free to do something else. So it was important to get that foundation, I think, because I know how to make it work. It's not just crazy without a backing. I know it can be crazy enough, but at the same time, if it needed to work, it could work.
So a question leading on from that is, how can us as students start to develop this way of thinking out of the box?
I think the first thing I did is I stopped being inspired by other buildings, because if you as an architect want to design a building, the last thing you should look at is another building. You have to look at sociology. I mean, for me, it's sociology, because I like understanding how people function, why they make certain decisions, people's psychologies, their physiologies. Like, those things inspire me. And obviously film and technology. So these are all things that come from outside. So the minute you want fresh ideas, start looking outside of it. Look at modern art if you have to. Look at sculptures. Look at cuisine. Look at cooking for inspiration. So it's important to not be inspired by the same things. So that's what I would tell students, because that's what I learned the hard way.
That's great. So moving on, but in a similar kind of area, Shamil has asked, you seem to use the tool of storytelling to really engage the client and us as an audience here. What's important? What are the ingredients, let's say, for a successful storytelling?
Well, it's like writing a movie. You need to have a plot. So there has to be moments of action. There has to be, you have to take them up and down the tempo. So you have to play with their emotions. So I would think a lot of my work comes from watching movies and understanding how plots go. So I think that's my biggest inspiration for my storytelling. And the other thing, I think the main thing in all of this is to not give away the answer too quickly. You want to hold back. So one thing that that I think students should do and play really smart when they do their juries, for example, is not put out everything that they know, but you can guide the jury into asking you the questions that you're prepared for. So I think that's a great win. You almost hint at things and then the audience kind of thinks they've got you in a spot and they ask you something, but then you're already ready for it. So I think that would be a really nice way to do it in academics.
So now you've told them the tricks. So when you come to the jury, you'll be able to see your own techniques being used, I hope.
Because it's true. What happens with movies nowadays is people look for Easter eggs. People are so good at finding these little cracks and things. So people will analyze your work. So you don't have to give them everything in one go.
That's very true. Let me move on to a little bit of a different line in questioning. We have two, and I'll say them both for you, and then you can respond. The first one is, what do you think is the key to creating a balance in a technologically advancing world? And then the second one is, what are the new drivers for public realm, especially in the Middle East, where most public realm are in precincts?
In precinct, oh, what do we do for public realms in the Middle East? Is that the question?
Yeah. What are the drivers for public realm, especially in the Middle East?
Well, I think the Middle East is a particularly unique context because you've got 6 months of fairly comfortable weather that you can walk around in, but you've also got some very extreme weathers. So the one-size-fits-all approach, to build like they build in New York, to build like they build in San Francisco and London wouldn't work here. So the first thing is to sort of rethink what is right for the Middle East, and that is one thing. The second one is I think you can still learn from old vernacular because, for example, in Draya, in that project, you understand that streets are designed for people. The module was the camel or the ass that was carrying weight. So the street was designed in its width and height to accommodate that kind of movement. Now, what happens is if you design an environment that is meant for cars and then expect it to work for people, that just doesn't happen. So we have to choose and prioritize who we're designing for. So right now what is happening is our streets are designed for cars, and then we superimpose a shaded structure, we superimpose some green and trees and expect it to work for people, and that just won't happen. So I think in the future with autonomous cars or maybe better technology in general is that the streets will go back to the people and the cars will become almost secondary. And then hopefully you'll see a change in the public realm. Does that work?
I think that answers both the questions, right? Creating a balance in a technological advancing world as well.
Yeah, I think the balance question, I don't know if this is what they meant, but maybe it was about depending so much on technology, for example. So one thing I've always felt is that, 100 years back, architects were in the driving seat. Architects were mathematicians, they were astrologers, they were, astronomers, they were scientists, they were inventors. We did everything. We advised kings, we advised, we could build structures, we could plan structures, foresee things. And now what happens is we are almost on a reactionary level. So if Google comes up with Alexa, if Google or Apple comes up with Home and Nest and so many other things, we are almost on a reactive footing. So if Mitsubishi comes up with an autonomous cars, we start designing streets for autonomous cars. Whereas I think we have the opportunity now, because we are in this state of flux, to drive the conversation the other way around. It should be, what do we want the streets to be? And because of which, what do we want the cars to be? And then Mitsubishi designs the car based on that, rather than the other way around. So I think there is an opportunity there as well. If that's what the question is about, like the balance between give and take with technology, who drives what?
A really interesting take. We have 2 more questions. So far as I can see, there's no more. If anybody would like to add, please do. So I'll just read these 2 out. Number 1 is, how well does the comic book style presentation hold up against other professional presentations? And the second one is...
Sorry, your voice.
No?
I didn't get the first.
Okay, I'll say it again. How well does this comic book style presentation hold up against other professional presentations? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and the second one, there was a mention about how you take your design process to the breaking point and then take 2 steps back. How do you know you've reached the breaking point and it's time to stop?
Okay, the first one first. The comic book style works really well as long as everybody else doesn't do a comic book style. So right now, when you are in a sea filled with hyper realistic renders and things, to see something very simple and very what do you call it? It's very basic. It obviously stands out. Your eyes are automatically drawn to it, and especially when you do competitions, judges look at 300 entries, 150 entries, 200 entries, and a lot of the times they don't give it the attention it deserves. They flip through it quite quickly. So the vision is very important. So I think giving them something that they haven't seen, that is almost a relief for their eyes, is a win, because once you've got their attention, you can then communicate your idea to them. So it works as long as everybody else is not doing it. And the second one, what is the second one, sorry?
The second one was about the breaking point. So you said you reach a breaking point and you take 2 steps back. So how do you know you've reached the breaking point and it's time to stop? If there ever is a time to stop, I would add to that.
Yeah, there is. I think one of the key things, if somebody goes, how do you do this? You work like hell. You just put a lot of effort. A lot of times, these things that people say, oh, this act of genius, it just came to me in a dream. It came to me, it just happened. For me, it doesn't work. I have to work like crazy on it. So I have to work an idea down to the bone, like over and over and over. And amongst them, there will be ideas that mean nothing, ideas that will are completely unworkable. And then there are a few that'll definitely function. Now, I don't do that for commercial projects. I don't do that in the office. It works really well when you do competitions where they're asking for something revolutionary. They're asking for something radical. Then you push an idea to the brink. Now, to push it to the brink, you have to suspend your rules a little bit. So if I don't know how to explain it, when you take it to the air, I mean, you will know there is a certain point after which the thing starts collapsing. It doesn't make any sense. It stops looking like what it's supposed to look like. It stops looking and functioning like an environment, if that makes sense. And then you've gone too far. But the point that is 2 steps before it, let's say you're drawing iterations. Let's say it's parametric. You're drawing iterations, and you're going to a point where it starts looking nothing like it's supposed to look. It doesn't function like a building and work like a building. Then you've gone too far. Because okay, the thing is, you always make compromises. So even when you build something, you're making compromises. But the thing is, when the compromise becomes greater than the end product. Does that make sense? What you're compromising on becomes.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying that the breaking point isn't found so easily. It takes time and exploration to know that you're there.
For me. For a lot of, I mean, it might mean that some people are really talented and they get to it instantly. They're able to push to that point. But for example, if somebody were to say, what is the future of a meeting room, right? Like there is a particular point after which you will keep pushing and you'll say, oh, 5 minutes to go to work. I'm able to walk 5 minutes to go to work, right? And do you want to live 5 minutes within work? Do you want to shop? Do you want to have your community facilities? Now, all of that goes out the window. If, for example, you just go, yeah, I connect to my Wi-Fi and my workplace is 10 seconds from my bed. So you suddenly understand that, some things don't work because it's not logical. It doesn't work anymore for that argument. Is that an okay example?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're talking about changing definitions of things as well and starting to redefine them, right? And so on that note, Raj, I think we are through with time, definitely, but super interesting. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll have you in the juries in 4th year, and hopefully your thesis project, you can bring that as well. And you'll be a good companion in 4th year, hopefully, as the year goes by. Definitely online, if not in person. So thank you so much for all of your generous time and ideas. It's been really enjoyable. I'll just hand over to Harpreet to close the session. If you want to add anything else, Raj, please do as well.
No, I had a great time. I mean, like most of my work, this was also last minute, but it just flows.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj. I think a very, very thought-provoking presentation, just as the weekends, and just the perfect timing for all our students, because our students have their interim juries coming in. And what I personally loved about the presentation was the romanticism with each one of the project. And it all becomes about actually how that expression can then begin to impact the way people think and live and behave and their attitudes, you know, and it is all about creating that shift in attitudes, which can actually be very challenging. So very, very impressive. I'm very happy to see your sketches. Something I think which will leave our students very inspired. In fact, interestingly, this year, you know, we're doing the exhibition with Dubai Design Week, where the students have prepared architectural collages. And I remember when the project was introduced, there's a bit of resistance the moment there is a fine arts implication or input, you know, and sometimes it's nice to have this reminder that architecture is just as any other form of art, you know, and you really can't create distinctions and create boundaries between all these different forms because they're so kind of integrated within each other. And I think your presentation was a clear reflection of that. And the last one, probably, I'm just hoping our students do understand that it is all about the value you bring to your projects through having empathy and recognition for the people you're designing for, you know, and sometimes in certain places you begin to forget that, you know, that who is it being done for, you know, and it's all about people. So thank you so much. And I'm going to just leave the students thinking, you know, we have this phrase every morning when we have a studio session. I'm like, what's your story? And your storytelling and the examples you actually went through are just brilliant. You know, I think it's limitless, the opportunities the students have to tell their stories, you know. So thank you so much. And thank you to all the students and all the faculty. And we'll see you soon again. Thank you so much.